Hi, my name is Letty, and you may have seen me a few months ago start a YouTube channel and then abandon it. I have an explanation for that. So, it's kind of a long story and it's pretty personal. Um, so, bear with me for a second. I have a medical condition. It's called dysautonomia and POTS. Well, POTS is a subset of dysautonomia. But anyway, um, I fell sick with it in the fall of 2021. And in January of 2022, I was sick enough that I had to leave my job, which was in Illinois, and I moved back to Texas. I moved into it with my parents where I could be cared for and see some doctors. It's a long story, but the basic, long story short, is after a lot of doctor's appointments, I was diagnosed with my condition in August of 2022. But that whole year, I had been living with my parents and not really doing anything because I couldn't work and so I thought, hey, I'll start a YouTube channel. That'll be fun and that'll be a way to, pass the time until I get better. But it was a lot of work, a lot more work than I was ready for. And so I definitely bit off more than I could chew, and I had to step away from it. And over the past few months, I'm still out of work, and it'll be a while until I'm well enough to go back to work. It's a long process of learning to manage a chronic illness like this. But I have learned the value of rest in the last few months. If you're a Christian, you know Psalms 23, like everybody does. And a couple months ago, I was reading it, and you know how it says, he makes me lie down in green pastures and he leads me beside still waters? Well, I was reading it a couple months ago, and I was very impressed that, in my case, makes me lie down in green pastures could be a synonym for forces me to lie down in green pastures, because, my health has really forced me to take a rest in the last year plus. And I have always kind of felt guilty if I'm not doing things and being productive. So this is a new experience for me. And the Lord really showed me in the last few months that I have to allow myself to rest and not feel guilty about it. Not only that, but I have to, even though health issues are not good, I can still be thankful for this time that the Lord is giving me rest and restoring my soul, as Psalms 23 states. But anyway, what does this have to do with my booktube channel? So I think that as I've been working out my rest and allowing myself to rest with the Lord, He has shown me that I can try this again, but in smaller chunks. I was very ambitious last time. I was like, oh, I want to talk about books, and I want to talk about writing, and I want to talk about all the stuff I love. Too much for my body to handle. But we're going to try this again, and we're going to take little tiny bites this time and not bite off more than I can chew, hopefully. And we're going to take it step by step. We're going to start out just talking about books. I love writing, but it takes a lot of preparation to talk about writing in a video, I think. And I think we're just going to stick to book reviews and TBRs right now, because hopefully that's a little simpler. So, and we're not going to do it all at once. For example, this video, if you've stuck around this long, is going to be my March reading wrap up, but it's only March 7th. So I'm going to do it in pieces throughout the month, talk about what I'm reading. When I finish a book, I'll film a short reading wrap up, and then I'll put it all together at the end of the month. So I'm not filming a whole big video at one time, because that takes a lot of energy. And hopefully this new method of mine will help me actually stick with this, because I really want to. I'm kind of excited about this, but I also need to prioritize rest and letting my body heal and learning to manage my illness. Like, that's something that my mom and I say a lot, because a lot of people like ask me, oh, when are you going back to work? Are you doing better? How's your health? And like my mom and I, it's hard to answer those questions because I'm like, I don't know when I'm going back to work. My mom and I, we say to each other, my job right now is to get well. So everything else is extra. But anyway, hopefully this new format will help us take things a little easier, and we'll see how it goes. So that was my spiel. I hope that you've stuck with me through it, and I'm sorry for spieling for so long. Let's talk about books. So today is March 7th, and I have already finished 3 books on my March TBR. So I'm averaging about 2 days per book right now, although I don't think that'll last the month, especially because I'm like going to see my brother next week, or actually at the end of this week for a long weekend, so that I'll be playing with my niece all weekend, so I probably won't read it all that weekend. So yeah, but anyway, right now I have 3 books to talk about, and these 3 came from the library. And guys, support your local library. I love my local library. I get ebooks from them. I get print books from them. They're great, especially for somebody who has no job and cannot afford new books. Woo! The first book I read in March was Amanda Dykes' Yours is the Night. So this was my first Amanda Dykes novel. I was really excited about it because this is World War I, and I love World War I and World War II novels. And I've also heard such great things about Amanda Dykes. Like, there's a lot of hype for her on YouTube and Instagram and all those lovely book platforms. So I was really excited about this one. This takes place in World War I, and it follows, so there's one girl, her name is Murray. Thankfully, it told us how to pronounce it in the book, or else I would have pronounced it way wrong. She's French. She lives in the Argonne Forest. I might be pronouncing that wrong. She lives in the forest of Argonne, where it's kind of between the front lines of the Allies and Germany at this point. So she's kind of like stuck in the middle of the war at the beginning of the novel. But she grew up in the forest, and she's really a girl of the forest. And so she knows how close the soldiers are, obviously, but like the forest is her home. But anyway, so that's Murray. And then there are 4 soldiers in the Allies. There's the main guy, which is Sergeant Matthew Pettigrew. And then there's a chaplain named George Piccadilly, and a writer, like a writing correspondent for a newspaper. His name, I know his name, I do. Henry, yes. His name is Henry, but he writes under the name Hank. So Henry, Hank, kind of goes back and forth through the novel. And then there's the captain, Jasper Truitt. So those are the 4 soldiers, and then there's Murray, who is a girl who lives in the forest. So Matthew and George and Henry are sent into the forest one night to chop down wood to help build up some spots in the trenches that have fallen down. And they hear this song, and it kind of shocks them a little bit. But apparently it's the Angel of Argonne. That's what the soldiers call her, because she comes at night and nobody ever sees her, but she comes and they hear her song, and she lays wreaths on the graves of the soldiers. But anyway, long story short, they find her. Like, not just hear her song, but they actually find her. And they also find out that the Germans are infiltrating the forest. If you know anything about World War I history, you know that the forest of Argonne was a big battleground. And so at this point, the Germans are infiltrating the forest, and they're laying traps and stuff, and they're getting ready for a really big battle. And so the soldiers are like, we cannot leave this girl in the forest. And so they bring her to the captain, and the captain is like, well, take her to Paris. And so these 3 soldiers set off on a journey to take Murray to Paris, where she'll be safe. And the novel takes off from there. It was really good. One thing I will say is that her language, I don't know if it's just this novel or if other novels. I feel like I've heard people say it's all her novels. But her writing style is really poetic, which it's beautiful, but there were moments, like, especially when, like, she described a conversation instead of just giving us the dialogue, where I was kind of like, wait, what? Like, what actually happened? What actually was said? Because she described it in a really pretty way, but there were a few moments, and maybe because I read it in, like, 2 days, I should have slowed down. There were a few moments that I was like, okay, but I'd rather you just be straightforward in this scene. But despite that, I really, really loved it because it was just a beautiful story about light in the darkness and God always being there for us, even through, like, the worst times. It was really, really good, and I would definitely recommend it, as long as you're okay with a more poetic writing style, because I know some people are like, no, I don't want to think when I'm reading, and that's cool. So this may not be the book for you if that's the case. Okay. That's Yours is the Night. The next book that I read in March was The Heart Between Us by Lindsey Harrel. This book follows two sisters, one, Megan, who was born with a weak heart, with a heart condition, that she got a transplant 3 years before this book takes place, and she's, like, in her early 30s. And then her twin sister, Crystal, who has been healthy her whole life. And they're a bit estranged, because Megan is like, oh, well, Crystal got to do everything I couldn't, and Crystal, lives with a lot of guilt because she was the healthy one, and it has separated their relationship a little bit. So Megan, 3 years after her heart transplant, is contacted by her donor family. They want to meet her. And so she goes to meet them, and they give her the journal of the girl whose heart she now has. And this girl, I forget her name, but she had a bucket list that she wanted to complete that she never got to complete because she died in a car accident. And so Megan decides, and this is a travel bucket list, and Megan has always wanted to travel. Like, she had a friend in the hospital, Caleb, who also had the same heart condition, and they kind of grew up in the hospital together. They were really close friends. And they used to talk all the time about traveling. But now that she actually has a good heart and is healthy, she's too scared to go travel because she doesn't want to have a relapse, and, she's used to living a very sheltered life because of her health condition, and it's hard for her to step out of those comfort zones, even though she has a good heart now. But her donor has this bucket list and it's a travel bucket list. And so she decides that she's going to complete the bucket list for her donor. And her sister decides to go with her, so she's not going alone. And so this trip is not only to complete the bucket list, but it's kind of, they're both hopeful that they can get their relationship back onto solid ground. And Crystal has her own issues. She has some issues with her husband because she's really become a workaholic, and he's like, you're not prioritizing us. I never see you anymore. And she's like, no, I love you, but I gotta go to work. And so she and her husband are also hoping that this trip will help her get some perspective and that they can work out their differences when they come back. So that's basically the gist of this book. I was a little worried when I picked up this book because, especially with how recent my own health struggles have been, I was a little afraid that it was going to hit kind of close to home. And there were definitely a couple places that did, especially one scene, like, that has to do with Crystal. Like, that one definitely hit close to home. But overall, I think it was a really, like, I didn't have very many problems with it, which I'm thankful for. And I really enjoyed the message, which is, like, learning to rely on God's strength and not your own, which is something that I have definitely had to do in the last few months. Like, I've been a Christian my whole life, and I've always known that, but there's something about being knocked off your feet physically for, like, over a year that really pounds that message home. And so that's something that I've learned, and so I love seeing it in this book. And also just the idea of not letting your physical disabilities stop you from living. That's something that I've also been learning the last few months, not only because I don't want to stop living, but I also have to do what I can handle, because like with the adventure with my YouTube channel months ago, that was too much for me and I couldn't handle it, and it really sent me into a flare. So it really tired me out. So that was too much for me, but I also, want to do this because I don't want to just sit at home and do nothing, because I can't stop living. And so those were messages in this book that I thought were really good. And then it was, despite being such a heavy subject, it was actually written in a really light and kind of fun way. Like, it didn't feel like a heavy book, even though there were a lot of heavy subjects. Oh, also, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but trigger warning about this book. The donor, the girl who died and gave her heart to Megan, was sexually abused as a child, and so there are references to that in her journal entries. So big trigger warning, if that's a problem for you, this is not the right book for you. Because her journal is it was suggested by her therapist to kind of get her thoughts out, and so the donor is looking for joy and light in spite of her past traumas. So it's present in the journal. It's not graphic or anything like that, because it's 10 years in the past by the time she's writing this journal, but it is there. So trigger warning for that. What was I saying? But anyway, despite the heavy topics, it was written very light, which was, part of me kind of liked it because I could really zoom through it, but the other part of me was kind of I feel like we're missing a little bit of depth. So I gave it 4 stars on Instagram, but the more I think about it, the more I'm maybe 3.5, because it was missing just a little bit of something. And speaking of stars, because I totally forgot with Yours is the Night, this one was 4 stars. Okay. It would have been 5 stars except for those few moments when the poetic writing style got a little bit on my nerves. But yeah, 4 stars. So that was The Heart Between Us. And then the third book I've read in March, also from the library, is A Girl's Guide to the Outback by Jessica Kate. So all 3 of these were new authors to me, but I've heard so much hype for this on Instagram and YouTube. I was I've got to try this book because everybody was talking about it seemed like. And it was cute. It's definitely a light, fun read, but it also has a really good message because well, let me tell you about it first a little bit. So Samuel Payton is a youth pastor in Virginia, and he heads up a ministry called Wildfire, which is for youth in the community to kind of get them into the church, and a lot of them have really rough lives. And then Kimberly, she is his partner. They didn't start out as partners, but she's the financial person of the ministry, and so the board member kind of made them partners a while ago. But they're very different because she is a financial guru, and she's here's how we expand, here's how we do this, and he is very, very risk averse. So he's I don't want to expand, I don't want to do that. And they fight a lot. But she decides to take her expansion plan to the board without his consent, and he quits and moves home to Australia to his family farm. And that's the first chapter. And then we skip 5 months later, and the board is we can't do this without him. He is the heart of this ministry. You either have to get him back, get his help finding a replacement, or we're going to shut down the ministry. And she's no, because she loves this ministry. And so she gets on a plane to Australia to go win him back to the ministry. And they kind of make a deal because his sister's farm is struggling and it needs financial help. So they make a deal that if she works on the farm for 6 weeks and gives her financial advice, then he will go back and find a replacement. But what she really wants in that 6 weeks is to convince him not just to find a replacement, but to come back to his position permanently, because he's he really is the heart of the ministry, and he's so good with the kids. So obviously they kind of learn some things about each other over this 6 weeks in Australia, and they go from fighting to something more. It's a bit of an enemies to lovers trope. And it's really good because she loves this ministry so much because she never had that sense of belonging in her childhood. So she's got some issues with like acceptance of herself and feeling loved. Whereas his risk-averse nature comes from past failures, and he has issues with guilt and not being able to get over his failures and live the life that God wants him to live. So they both have spiritual struggles that they have to work through, which was good. And it was super cute. And there's also like a side storyline with his sister Jules and her ex-boyfriend Mick, which was super cute. The author actually says in the author note that her favorite character is Mick. And I can see that. I like Mick. He's like just a really good stand-up guy. So yeah, it's cute. It's got a good spiritual message. Although I would say it's kind of like light on the faith. Like they do have their own growth that is with God. So that's definitely there. Yeah, I give it like, I think 3.5 stars. It is really cute. And that's about it. Okay, those are the first 3 books of March. Hey everyone, good afternoon. Let me start this video by saying when I recorded the last segment, I completely forgot to use my microphone. So I have the microphone plugged in now, but I just want to give you guys some warning before I turn it on that your sound may need to be adjusted. So I'm going to be turning a microphone on in... Okay, so hopefully you guys can hear me better now with this microphone. I'm sorry if you had to like turn it up earlier and then turn it down now. I completely forgot to use the microphone in the last segment because I'm still learning the ropes of YouTube, I guess. So it is March 13th, and I have 2 new books to talk about in my reading wrap-up. They're both ebooks. The first one was a book I chose for middle grade March, which is a fun reading prompt done by some other booktubers on here that I wanted to try out. I really haven't read any middle grade books at all. When I was a kid reading, I grew up with like missionary books and things like that because my grandparents were missionaries. So they collected like all the missionary books for my mom when she was a girl, and then the books that she had when she was a girl, my siblings and I read when we were little. So yeah, I haven't read much like middle grade fiction at all. So this is a pretty new experience for me. Like I've read a couple, but this is a pretty new experience for me. So the book that I chose was called So Not Okay by Nancy Rue. And like the people, the booktubers who created Middle Grade March, they had some prompts, which I was going to follow mostly. But then when I was searching like book options, like things to read, I came across this 3-book series by Nancy Rue, which is for bullying. And it looks like the first book, So Not Okay, looks at bullying through the lens of a bystander. And then the second book looks at it through the lens of a victim. And the third book looks at it through the lens of the bully. And so I was like, that's really cool. I kind of want to support that. So I decided to read those. I only read the first book in this series because she writes about bullying, but she uses a really extreme case. So it's really intense. And they're not short books. Like the first book was like over 350 pages. So it's like a full-length novel. And it's pretty intense. So I read the first one and I was like, okay, I have to take a break before I read these other 2. So I don't know when I'll read the other 2. But I did read the first one, which is So Not Okay. And I liked it. I think she did a really good job because what she did is that she was able, like she has the main character who is a student and who is observing this bullying going on, but doesn't really know if she wants to get involved because, her classmates say, oh, well, if you just stay out of the way, then you won't get in the headlights of the bully. But then if you try to be friends with the victim or something, then you're going to get bullied too. So, but then she does a group project, a science project, and their question that they're researching is why are some people mean? Is it something in their brain? Is it something that they learn? Is it nature versus nurture? So I think that having that angle, the author had a lot of opportunity because she was able to really put a lot of clinical vocab and clinical information about bullying into the book, but do it in a way that still relates to middle graders. Because like middle graders, they don't want to read a handbook from a counselor on bullying. But because these students were doing a science project on it, they were able to get that clinical information and then put it into their words. And so it's really almost educating middle schoolers on bullying, but through the lens of a fictional story. So I feel like she did a really good job with that. And it's Christian fiction, so like she looked at bullying through like scripture and the golden rule and everything. That was really cool. The only like problem I had with the book is that like it's middle grades, like all the little boys in the class are like obsessed with bodily fluids and all the little girls are like, oh, that's so gross. And me as an adult am like, why is this in this book? And it was, I haven't done much middle grade reading before. So it makes sense like why those themes were like in middle grade books. But me as an adult was like, okay, I don't care about the students that are like burping and stuff. Like, why? So just being a new genre for me, middle grade, there was that. But I think that she handled bullying and getting that information out there while being an interesting story. She did a really good job with. It's a good job, Nancy Rue. And if you have like kids that are in middle school, like middle school and junior high kids, those kids can be really vicious. Like I've always believed that like 7th and 8th graders are some of the most vicious school kids out there. So if you have like 6th or 7th graders or 8th grader like kids and they have bullying going on in their school, I think this would be a really good like book to give them to help them like understand a little bit and help them, know how to handle that a little bit. It was definitely aimed at girls over boys. Like it's definitely aimed that way. So if you have like daughters in like 6th or 7th grade that are dealing with girls that are like bullying at their school, I think it would be a good option for them. Because then they don't feel like they're going to like a class on bullying or anything. It's just a fun book that also will teach them about bullying. Okay, the other book that I have read is called The Sergeant and the Girl Next Door by Laura Rupper. Not sure how to pronounce her last name. But this was a book that I got an ARC from NetGalley from. So it doesn't come out till April 4th. But I did get a NetGalley ARC to review. And I liked it. It was cute. It's a very light read. Like it's only like 248 pages or something like that. And so it's a very light and quick read. It's definitely shorter than some other novels of its genre. I gave it 3.5 stars to 3 stars in my review mainly because it was like cute and it was nice and it was sweet, but it just wasn't like my favorite book. And I guess I should give you like the blurb. So basically, there is Davis, and he is coming home from World War II, and he went to war with his best friend and childhood next door neighbor Patrick. Only Patrick died and is not coming back. So Davis is coming back not only with survivor's guilt, but with also like some really bad memories of the war. And he just wants to get on with his life. And Patrick's younger sister, Faith, who lives next door to Davis's family, Davis comes home and he's like, well, since Patrick died, I really want to, and also Patrick's father died during the war as well. So Faith and her mother lost a father and a brother. And so when Davis comes home, he's like, I really want to help out this family. Patrick would want me to. We were best friends, and I loved them as if they were my own family. I want to help them out. So he comes over right away, and he's like fixing stuff around the house, and he's trying to be really helpful. And the mom, Faith's mother, is really, really excited about that. She's like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. This is You've always been like a second son to me. I'm so happy you're home, even if my actual son didn't come home. But Faith is not happy about that because she blames Davis for convincing Patrick to go to war, to volunteer for the army. So she thinks that it's Davis's fault that Patrick hasn't come home. So she really blames him for that. And things get more complicated because Davis quickly falls in love with Faith, and he wants, to prove to her that he's the right man for her, but she's like, I don't want anything to do with you. Plus, she has a boyfriend named Freddie who she goes out dancing with all the time, who is kind of immature, and Davis really doesn't like him, not only for jealousy factor, but he just doesn't like him as a person. Like, he never liked him growing up. So, there's that. And like, it was like your typical cute little story. It dealt with forgiveness, and that was nice. I really liked Marcia, which was Faith's mother. She was a really good character. And there was an interesting side story with Faith's cousin, Rose, which dealt with, like, because in World War II, you had a lot of quick marriages, soldiers would meet a girl on leave, and they'd marry them in, like, 2 weeks, because they didn't know when they were shipping out, they didn't know when they were coming home again. So that's what happened to Rose, and she has an interesting side story with that. I just didn't love it. Faith was kind of, I don't even know. She was a hard worker, and I liked how determined she was to save her family business, because after her father died, she took over their family business, and she was a hard worker, but she was also kind of like, I can't even explain it. Like, I just didn't love it. But one thing that I can definitely explain is that I wish it had more Faith content, because Faith was a, I guess with a character named Faith, I should say I wish it had more spiritual content, so we don't get confused there. Because Faith was like a Sunday school teacher for the town youth, and she did have one conversation with her pastor where she was like, I don't feel like I'm qualified to teach Sunday school, especially since I can't forgive Davis. And they did have an interesting conversation about that. But other than that, and other than like them just being in church every week, I didn't see a lot of Faith content. And it talked about Faith and her mother being in church every week. I mean, I know that like Davis and his family went to church, talked about Davis' family, but it never really specified, it never really talked about Davis going to church or his spiritual walk. I don't know. I don't remember anything specific about that. So yeah, I really wish that it had more spiritual content, that they were, because she was able to forgive him and he was able to get rid of some of the guilt that he had, and they had that character growth, but I just wish they had the spiritual growth alongside of that character growth. So that was my opinion on that. And those were the 2 books that I have read in this segment. Okay. Hi, everyone. It is March 15th, and I have a new book to add to my reading update, and that is A Match in the Making by Jen Turano. And y'all, I love this book. I'm not gonna lie, like, it was fantastic. I actually won this book in a Instagram giveaway done by Sue K. Reads, and it was my first Jen Turano book. I haven't read any of the other ones. I mean, I've definitely seen her books around, and I've had friends who've read them, and I don't know, I've never really been that interested to pick them up. I think mostly because her covers in the past have not been my favorite, so I've been like, I don't know. But I won this one in a giveaway, and I do like this cover. I really like the font. The font's really nice. And it's a nice cover, I think. But I won this in a book giveaway, so it was my first Jen Turano book, and I loved it. I'm just going to say right now, 4.5 stars. Like, it was just fantastic. So this book follows Gwendolyn Brinley, and she has been working as a paid companion for her cousin for the last few years, but she's like, I kind of want something different, something a little relaxing. So she takes a job to be a paid companion to a older woman in Newport for the summer. But when she gets there, the woman breaks her leg and is like, well, since I can't do my matchmaking work, I'm going to promote you from companion to assistant matchmaker for the Newport season, which Newport being where all the rich 400 of New York summer. So high society, high snobs, you get to matchmake among them. And she's like, I'm sorry, what? By the way, this is historical fiction. It takes place in 1888. So yeah, should have mentioned that first. So she is assigned to kind of like probe the catch of the season, which is Walter Townsend. And so she goes to this guy and she's like, what are you looking for in a wife? And he's like, well, to be honest, I just want a mother for my children, because his 3 children he's kind of neglected them since his wife's death and left them up to the nannies and their grandmothers who love to spoil them, and they have become terrors, like real brats, kind of, the 3 of them. And so he's like, I need a wife to take my kids in hand. And first she's like, well, shouldn't you be doing that because you're their father? And he's kind of like, oh, well, society fathers don't have a hand in their children's rearing. We leave that to the nannies. And she's just kind of like, ew. So they don't like each other at first because she's like, why can't you just get involved in your kids' lives? But anyway, so he's like, well, it's your job to find me a wife, so you should just go do that. But as the summer goes on and they start getting to know each other a little bit, and she helps him get more involved in his children's lives, and he starts seeing her for kind of who she is and not just a matchmaker, both of them kind of start to realize that his perfect new wife may be her, but then they don't know what to do about that. So the story goes from there. It was just so good. It made me smile. It made me laugh. I just really, really enjoyed it. And one of the things I loved about this is that it was like a whole ensemble cast. Because with her being a matchmaker, she has a lot of interactions with different members of the Newport Society, and she's matching up different people, and so she's getting to know different people. So you have a lot of ensemble characters, a lot of side characters, and they're just each of the side characters are so unique. They're not your cookie cutter side characters. They can't be traded out for one another. They each have a personality, and for her to be able to give like 10 to 12 different characters in her book, each genuine personalities, but not feel like they're being inundated with all these characters, really good, really awesome. I loved her friend she meets in the beginning, Adelaide. Like, I loved her from the beginning. I was like, this girl's awesome. I like her. I want more of her. And then when I found out that Turano, the second book in this series, is going to be about Adelaide, I was like, yes, I'm excited. I already want to read it. So I gave this 4.5 stars. And the only reason it lost half a star, in my opinion, is because I just wanted a little more spiritual faith stuff in there. My personal favorites are the ones that take the plot and take the faith and they mix them together very well. And while this was cute and funny and I absolutely loved it, it just didn't have a lot of faith content. And I prefer that. Like, if I'm going to rate something perfect, I want a good amount of faith content. So because I felt it was lacking there, it lost half a star. But still, 4.5 stars is awesome. I loved it. I'm definitely going to read the second book when it comes out in the fall. And yeah, that's a match in the making, y'all. Definitely recommend. Oh, also, I'm doing the Christian Romance Reading Challenge of 2023 that was Oshina Gotta Read 'Em All here on YouTube and Instagram. She came up with this reading challenge for Christian fiction, and I've been participating with it on my Instagram. And so this was my March pick for that, being a book in a series. So yeah, just sharing that. Okay. Hey y'all, it is March 16th, and I have 2 new books to add to the reading wrap-up. The first is The Italian Ballerina by Kristy Cambron. This is the second Kristy Cambron book I've read. I've also read The Lost Castle. I read it like last summer. This book is set in 2 different timelines. It's 3 different points of view, but 2 timelines. So one timeline is in the present day, and then one is in World War II. So in the present day, there is a girl named Delaney, and her grandfather has recently died. He's a World War II vet. And she is contacted by a family in Italy who says that her grandfather had something that belonged to them. So she goes to Italy to work this out. And there she kind of finds out the story of what her grandfather did during the war. So the other timeline is in World War II, and it follows two different characters in World War II. One is a American medic named Courtney Coleman, who is Delaney, the present-day girl, her grandfather. And then the other is Julia Bradbury, who was a British ballerina. Both of them, it tells the World War II timeline is told from both of their points of view. They both end up in Rome during World War II at a hospital on Tiber Island. And this hospital has a made-up illness called Syndrome K that the doctors and the friars of the hospital made up in order to hide Jews. So basically, they hide Jews in what they call the quarantine unit, and they tell the soldiers, oh, you can't come in here because they have this thing called Syndrome K. It's really, really contagious. You'll get it. You might die. And the German soldiers stay away from them. So they're able to hide Jews there. So that is the basic storyline. I gave this book 3 stars because it's a really beautiful message and a really beautiful plot. I mean, it's based on a true story. Like, this Syndrome K, it happened in a real hospital in Rome during World War II, and like a lot of Jews were saved because the doctors made up this illness to hide them in a quarantine wing. And that's really awesome. It's a really awesome storyline. And also the themes of sacrifice and love and giving of yourself for another person is really beautiful. I gave it 3 stars because it's sad. Like, I like moving stories and I like really beautiful storylines like this, but I also like happy endings. And although most of the characters got a happy ending, a couple of them didn't, and it made me really sad. I also gave it 3 stars because of, this is kind of the same as The Lost Castle, which I read last summer. She tells it in 3 different points of view, and I feel like with 3 different points of view, we don't get as much development or growth as we would if it were 1 or 2. Especially with like the present day storyline, there's like a romance involved in that, and I was just like, this is just really, really pushed, and it happens really quickly simply because we just don't have a lot of time in that point of view. There's not enough time to develop things, and with the 2 characters in the World War II point of view, I had the same idea. I wanted more development. So if she had just done 2 points of view instead of 3, we would have had more time for more development. And that was the same thing I had with the other book of hers that I read last summer. So there's that. The next book I read is The Librarian of Boone's Hollow by Kim Vogel Sawyer. And this book, it takes place during the Great Depression. And we have Adelaide, or Addie as she's called. And she is a college student in in Lexington, Kentucky. But her father loses his job because it's the Great Depression and is unable to pay her bills. So she has to leave college and get a job. And she gets a job as a rural librarian in a mountain town called Boone's Hollow. And this library is a part of the government programs that they did during the Great Depression to gain jobs. So they wanted to get more people in rural areas reading, so the government created rural pack horse libraries, and that's where she goes to work. The guy in this book, his name is Emmett, and he also came from the university in Lexington, but he's actually originally from Boone's Hollow. And after he graduates university, he looks for a job every year, but because it's the Great Depression, he can't get hired on, so he goes home to Boone's Hollow. This book, I gave it 4 stars. It really reminded me of the TV show The Waltons, which is a show that I grew up watching with my mom, so it's one of my all-time favorite shows. I have a lot of nostalgia for it. And it really, really reminded me of The Waltons. There's like a plot line in The Waltons, and I don't know if you've watched the show. It's a pretty old show. It's from the 70s, which is not actually that old, but also considering it's 2023, like 50 years ago, which seems crazy. Like, when I say the 70s, it doesn't feel like it should be that old, but it is 50 years ago. Anyway, so there is a plotline in the Waltons with one of the daughters, Mary Ellen, who goes on a nursing route because she's a nurse and she eventually becomes a doctor, I think. But she goes like on a nursing route to up into the mountains, and all the mountain people are like really distrusting of her at first because they don't know her and they're super superstitious. And that really, I was really reminded of that plot line in the Waltons with this book because Addie, when she comes to this town and she tries to bring these books to the mountain people, she is an outsider and they are like meeting her at gunpoint. They're like, what you doing on my land, woman? We don't know you. You're a stranger. We don't trust you. We don't trust strangers. And also there's a lot of superstition going on around. Like the woman that she stays with, people don't like her because she uses, she digs up herbs in the forest and she does like herbal remedies to cure people. So people think she's a witch. And they're like, oh, that lady's a witch. Why are you living with her? So there's a lot of superstition, a lot of distrust of strangers going on. There is also a storyline, and this is a trigger warning. There is a storyline of abuse in this book. It's not explicit, and by that I mean like the author never writes a scene where the abuse is happening. Like she does not pin that, put it to paper at all. But there is a character that's going through that, so you see the aftermath, like the bruises, and you see her emotional struggle. So though it's not depicted on the page here, it is a big storyline in the book. But yes, I gave this 4 stars. It's very good. It has a really good spiritual message that deals with like distrust of strangers and superstition and all that. And also, it's cute. It's a cute story, and it just really reminded me of the Waltons, which I enjoyed. So that was 4 stars. So those are the 2 that I wanted to update you on right now. I will say, because I feel like it's only March 16th, and this video is probably getting pretty long at this point, because this is like, my 4th or 5th installment, and they're each several minutes long. So what I might do is, and actually the more I think about it, the more I think this is what I will do, I'll split my March TBR up into 2 parts. So I'll probably end part 1 right around here, and I'll get that edited and posted, and then I'll put up a part 2 closer, like at the end of the month with the other half of the month's reading, because I feel like if I do it all in one video, like I still have a lot of books that I'll probably read this month. Because I don't even know how many I've read so far this month. I've read 8 books so far this month, and it's March 16th. So there's like still a couple weeks left in March, which means a lot more reading, and I don't want this video to be like super long. So I'll probably end part 1 here, and then I'll meet you back up with part 2. Also, before I end, let me just say, if you want more in-depth reviews of any of these books, you can find them on my blog, which I'll link below. I'll also list below all the books that I've mentioned here and give you a link to my Instagram account where I post about a lot of books. So, there's that. See you in part 2.